If you can hear me say, "Ayo!"
Ayo!
Say, "Oh my, coming!" If you can hear me say, "Ayo!"
Ayo!
Hey, I love that y'all are talking to each other, and I love that you all are getting coffee and snacks. We are gonna need to start soon, like real soon. Isn't there a song? I was about to start singing a song, but I can't remember. No, we are not going to see the king. Sorry, my mind. All right, if you can hear me say, I'm sorry, what?
I'm sorry, what?
I was going to make y'all learn I go, I may, but I could. But I couldn't remember. I know what it is, but I couldn't remember the definition. Yes, thank you. All right, so while we're still circling back, I'm gonna just lull you with the dulcet tones of my voice. One of my cultural things that I learned in the call and response tradition is the person in the front of the room may say, "I go," and then you respond, "I may." So if I say, "I go," you say,
I may.
And essentially it means, hey, are you listening? Can you hear me? Like, are you present with me? Are we walking together? And the response is, yes, I can hear you. I'm present. I'm listening. So if you hear me say, "I go," then you say,
I may.
"I go."
I may.
Look at us. We're now reassembled. I know we're all still kind of, people will trickle in, but we will need to get started on the next part. And so people can trickle in and out as needed to take care of yourselves. Are we ready, to the extent possible, to go into the next section? Yep. Gestures are also good. All right. Well, let's go.
Thank you, Geneseo. Okay. All right. In this portion of the presentation, we're going to go over some definitions of community ownership, community land trusts, and cooperatives. How many of you actually do work with community ownership in some way, community land trusts, and or cooperatives? Raise your hand. Great. Okay, so what is community ownership? What is community ownership? There are many different models of community ownership, but let's think about what we're already doing that provide choices in democratic processes. Community ownership means that we are building power and control over decision making to meet our social, cultural, and economic needs. Rather than outside entities deciding what to do with the resources, we can come together to make decisions about our goals, needs, and how we will use things that we own and control. there are different types in terms of residentially focused community ownership. Helping to keep people in their homes, making their homes more affordable, more dignified, and deeply affordable. In terms of housing, cooperative ownership provides control by protecting residents, also social infrastructure in our social networks, right? Like this, the story of the West Side Flats displacement, before that happened, we had very rich social infrastructure. In the Rondo community, before I-94 came through it, we still do have that. But I mean, these are the things that we want to uphold when we think about housing. Commercially focused community ownership helps us to have more say over what is done with our empty and our underutilized and vacant spaces, to help Black and brown businesses thrive, to start up but also sustain themselves. And by doing this, we're keeping the wealth in the community. We're place-keeping in many ways. And not just wealth by dollars, but also the wealth of our culture. Our cultures are our resources. Okay, so how community ownership works for us. Community ownership and control can help us create and preserve green spaces like gardens, farms, parks, trails, helping with access to fresh foods and spaces to enjoy. What place on the West Side reminds you of this? Can anyone name, just throw it out there. Any community garden or?
The communal garden on Capitol View.
Anywhere else in the West Side that reminds you of this? Icy Cup. How about Twin Cities wide? Any other examples? Frogtown, I think, has a really important community garden. There's community gardens on the north side. Yep. Okay, and community ownership in terms of advocating for resources around climate, changing climate, seasons, home, winter already, like, it's also about how we maintain our homes, and we have important tenant unions on the West Side that are helping with tenant power and tenant rights. So, a community land trust, we also are going to use the word CLT, okay? So, community land trusts purchase land, housing, or commercial property in the neighborhood. They often own the land. They're a community-based organization, nonprofit, and what happens is a lot of people will rent or own the property on top of that land. And also it helps to make it more affordable long-term, community land trusts. It's a tool to concentrate community control, and some benefits is that it enables renters to participate in community decision-making, addresses housing insecurity, as well as stabilizes access to housing more long-term. So, I'm just gonna go over, have y'all ever heard of New Communities Incorporated, Inc.? Very important history. It's an African-American community land trust that started in 1969 during the height of the Civil Rights Movement. And the cousin of Martin Luther King, Jr., Slater King, and Robert Swain were a part of that establishment. So this is a very important piece of history. There's also a really good documentary called Arc of Justice, and maybe we can talk about that with Mikeya from Rondo Community Land Trust later. But because of time, more CLTs, there are actually 260 now as of 2021. So this was the first one, there's now 260 in the United States. Okay. All right, other examples. Anyone heard of City of Lakes Community Land Trust in Minneapolis? I learned about them working with Nexus, North Star, Black Cooperative Fellowship. Anyone heard of that? Highly recommend it. We're gonna bring Nexus into the series too. But they started in 2002, and one of the largest in the U.S. One outside of Minnesota is Boston Neighborhood Community Land Trust, started in 2008, with the focus on keeping neighbors in their homes, building equity through controlled housing. And I'm going to pass it to Justicia for Cooperatives.
All right. Okay, so before we talk about cooperatives, how are we feeling about the definitions that we've been getting so far? Are they like vibing? They make sense? You also have key terms in your folder, which reiterate a little bit of that information for you. Okay. So cooperatives. So what I learned about cooperatives, because I'm still learning, is that they can kind of be about anything. A lot of times we see them as like businesses or like companies or sometimes even housing. Are there any cooperatives that are coming to anybody's mind right now when I say like a business? Mississippi Market, Seward Co-op, what is it? Real Life? I don't know that one, but hey. Oh, awesome. So like an elders housing cooperative. Yeah, and so, but there's one where?
On the east side, right?
Okay, so there's one on the east side. Yeah, so like, those are some of the ones that we're familiar with, but they really can be for anything. They can be for childcare. They can be for, a lot of farms are coming up as cooperatives. One comes to mind, 40-acre co-op. And it's a way for us to be thinking about owning things together and controlling things together that are typically owned or controlled by outside entities, or working together to solve, to bring solutions, that's what I want to say, to bring solutions to things that we need. So childcare, or it can also be around things like mutual aid. There are so many options. And like what I learned about mutual aid, for example, is like, it's kind of like the idea that like, if I'm like $5 short trying to buy eggs, because we know how expensive those are right now, you could lend me, I could get the $5 from you to afford the eggs that I need, and then later, if you are $2 short for the thing that you need to get, you could get the $2 from me, and you could afford the thing that you need to afford. So cooperatives are just many, many different ways of us coming together and sharing resources. So that can be coming together and sharing, owning, and making decisions about land, about our business. So some cooperatives, people actually own like their company. So that's what like Mississippi Co-op is doing. And there are some other ones, and I don't have the clicker anymore. Okay. Yes, thank you. There are a lot in Minnesota actually. And we just gave a few examples. So you would be welcome to take a picture of this slide so you can look them up. But in particular, like, so Yo Mama's House, for example, based in North Minneapolis, founded by one of the community elders, a black woman, and it is about art, using art as a healing space for mothers of all ages. And that's what they do, and they come together, they share control and responsibility for this group that they put together, and then they provide services to the community around them. Another example of a co-op is the Field at Root Springs, and it's owned and operated by, I think, women identified folks, by POC folks, and they like own a building and some land where you can have a meeting like this, or you can go up there if you just need a break from your kids, or you know, other things, and you can get away. So because many of us busy folks don't also always have access to resting, like spaces where we can rest, they wanted to be intentional about folks that look like me and folks that look like many of us being able to have a space to go and rest. And so they own it, they control it, and then they provide services in turn for the rest of us. Another one is Happy Earth Cleaning. They're a cleaning business. They're a cleaning company. They do what most cleaning companies do, except their employees own and control the company. And so they can make decisions like, Are we going to use really harsh chemicals in our cleaning, or are we going to use products that are better for the environment? Are we going to expect people to be working 16-hour days? I don't know what they do exactly, so, right? But it's things like, how many hours are we going to work? What is PTO going to look like? What is the flexibility in working going to be like? And so it's about being able to share that power. So we went through these definitions kind of fast. If anybody has questions, you are welcome to ask them. We're going to go into a short reflection as we get ready for the next part. Returning to the point about honoring things that we are already doing in our culture, in our community, with our neighbors, in our families. Let's think of some ways that people are already doing things. So I got a really good story when working through this slide about all the abuelas and mothers of the church. When somebody needs to get something done, whether that's sending money to Mexico or something that's happening here, they all get together and they make tamales. And I wish they would tell me when they're doing that. But they make tamales. The tamales go out into the world. Some amount of compensation is gotten for those tamales, which I would pay dearly for. And then they are able to bring a solution for whomever they are intending to help. So they didn't have to go and get registered to do that, because they're the abuelas of the church, right? And so they're doing that work. So many of us have seen these things practiced, have practiced them ourselves. And so please be thinking about some of those ways. You can write them down if anybody wants to say, some of those examples. And then thinking alongside that, what are maybe some ways we can apply that to the West Side? So things that are maybe being done, that more could be done, things that aren't happening, or things that used to happen and that could come back. So I'll ask y'all to think a little bit about that, and we're going to start transitioning into the next part of what we're doing. In the meantime, you will be welcome to say ideas that come to your mind when you think of that. Anybody have one? Okay. Hey. 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 Say hey.
Hey.
Oh, okay.
So I can share one right now that I think is kind of, from what I understand, every time I share this, I've so far heard it, we do that too. So back in Mexico, when cats don't got that much money, but they want to be able to buy something like large, right, like a car or something, or you don't trust the bank, or you don't want to feel like you're going to get jacked, what you end up doing, what they end up doing is they end up getting 2 or 3 or 4 other people involved where you contribute $50, right? So everybody contribute $50. You find out who at the end of that month is actually going to get all that money. So if you have 4 people, you would get $200, right? So if you have more people that are contributing more, then all of a sudden at the end of the month, then you rotate that. So I was telling a sister from Liberia this, and she's like, we call that mono. We call that mono. They knew that too. How to get around the bank system, right? How to make sure you don't have to pay that extra interest. And being universal, I just thought it was phenomenal. It's a brilliant idea, and it's a way of being able to contribute and actually be part of something.
Can you say the name? What we call that?
What do we call it in Mexico?
En México es lotería. Lotería.
Tandas, ¿no?
¿O tandas?
Tandas.
Tandas. Yep.
It is kind of along the same lines that he just mentioned, but I remember a story my son told me about, there's 3, 4, 5 of the kids getting together and they're hungry and their mama didn't give them only $2, and they pooled all their money together, went up to Little Caesars, and they fed themselves over and over and over. So that is cooperative community, collective ownership, right?
Yeah.
So I got $2 from my mom, you got $2 from yours, and we made it happen.
Yes. Yes.
Oh, Lord.
Y'all gotta make some noise for that. Okay. The babies had sense enough to be like, okay, if I'm eating, you eating, right? And that's a big thing for me. Okay, I'm not gonna go into my life story. I'm not gonna give y'all my testimony no more. Is there anyone else that has an example of ways that is showing up in your family, in your culture, in your community? Ooh, you do? I love that.
Sorry, for those of y'all who
don't know, I'm a spoken word artist, so like I don't need a mic. I'm real dramatic by myself. Anyways, so I like obviously grew up on the west side, and our like community has always come together for one another. They used to call my grandma Lady in the Blue House. So like people who were homeless, they would like go and like mow her lawn or something, and she would like give them tamales, and she would give them whatever money she had left, and like it was a safe haven for all people, and that's the kind of the legacy that we like choose to carry on. But also like that's an example of my grandma showing up. Recently, our community has showed up for my family real hard, and have been like just loving on us in every single way possible, and just have been kind of the reason why we've been able to come so far in our journey of fighting for justice. And our community, Westside, is just always banding together for one another, and we ain't never gonna give up the fight at the end of the day.
All right, as we get ready to go to the next thing, I want to honor specifically the part of coming together in difficult times, because not everything, like we get to have joy too, we get to come together and do fun stuff, but we know hardship, we know what that looks like. And there are all these different ways in our cultures and in our communities where we come together. So some folks didn't give examples, but what's coming to my mind, because I'm in the middle of a rewatch of Little House on the Prairie, is some traditions around like when someone passes, you bring, right, what type of food do you bring?
Hot dish.
Hot dish. So cultural specificity, right? So some folks bring hot dish or other comfort foods. My favorite chicken is funeral chicken, okay? There's nothing like a homegoing and a repast and the chicken that they have. But it is an act of love, and it is an act of resistance. And that is an important thing when we're navigating these systems. It doesn't matter what specific solutions that we come up with, as long as we're coming together to do them. There's going to be a range of things that we're going to think about, and a range of things that we're going to be able to do. And as we continue to learn and to build, we will empower and support the babies that already have sense enough to pool their $2 together to create and think about more. So we are thinking from a place of abundance. So how can we have more together? Do we like that? Yeah. I like that. I just made it up. Okay, so we're going to the next thing. Are you ready? Okay.
Yes. Thank you, Geneseo. I would love to bring up for the panel Mikeya Griffin from Rondo Community Land Trust and Roberto de la Riva from Renters United for Justice. Please give a warm round of Hey, we lost one wireless mic. If you find it, then maybe we don't have to do it that way. I'm sorry. You can. You can. No, not this one, the wireless. Yeah, it's okay. Well, first off, I just want to thank both Roberto and Mikeya for making this happen. We've been really trying to get this going for some time. Mikeya Griffin from Rondo Community Land Trust, we've been working pretty closely on the west side, looking at acquiring some properties, and she'll share more about that. But Rondo, of course, we are in total solidarity of the things that Rondo is doing to reallocate resources, to repair what's been done, because the west side also has a story. West Side Flats, but also in many places. Roberto, it's so good to see you. Here from Renters United for Justice, representing South Side of Minneapolis, and will really give us a powerful story about housing cooperatives. Okay, in South Minneapolis in that process. So first, we're gonna do ladies first. So if you could, we're gonna sync up the IX slide, and I'll help with that in a moment. But if you could just give maybe 5 minutes of a background on Rondo Community Land Trust, and then we'll go and do Roberto for 5 minutes, and then we'll do some Q&A. Does that sound okay, everyone? All right.
Is it afternoon? Good afternoon. All right. Thank you. I love being in fellowship with all of you. So part of that story about throwing biscuits, that was my great auntie Rosie, and she was a spitfire. She threw out some biscuits, and then all of a sudden my family is from Port Gibson, Mississippi to St. Paul, Minnesota. And that was a journey, but many arguments about when that happened. But I would like to say that, I'll try to make this fast, because I only have 5 minutes. That, oh, no, I'm not going to do that. You know, when they came up here and were directed to where the colored people stay, on Rondo Avenue, they lived in a rooming house right on Rondo Avenue. And, you know, when 94 came through and that economic violence happened to the community, my uncle, who was a war vet, could not even use his veterans benefits to purchase a home. They ended up selling some of their farmland, because my auntie said she didn't want to be no farmer's wife anyway. They sold some of their land in Mississippi so that they could get down payment and pay for their house in Rondo, in the Rondo community, where we still have the family house. Well, my aunt and uncle, especially my auntie Rosie, my mother's side of the family had 13 brothers and sisters. 10 of them came to Minnesota. She incubated them in her basement, and if you weren't going to school, you were working, and if you were working, you were giving her half of whatever the money you were supposed to have, and you were going to church. And, yeah, because I was in church 7 days a week. I know, right? The injustice of it all. But when they were ready to launch, and she determined when they were ready to leave the nest, she gave them the money that she had saved for them so that they could start off. Subsequently, my aunts and uncles owned property and land together. My aunt and uncle, they all had some kind of commerce, because when all that economic violence happened to the Rondo community, over 300 businesses, over 1,000 homes taken, it was this complete owned, interdependent commerce. There were doctors, lawyers, attorneys, grocery stores, civic clubs, all the things. Some of that stuff still happened. It just didn't happen always formally. So my uncle worked full-time, but he also did taxes. So, you know, collectively they owned about 40 properties in the community, and really provided homes. No one had to worry about a home. My aunt and uncle had like a full-fledged beauty salon in their basement. And if any of you have ever been tortured by a hot comb, that's why this hair is curly right now, because we're not straightening it out. But many Saturdays spent with the rest of the cousins. I grew up in the Rondo community. I was a community baby. I loved it. Lived with a lot of my family. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Tiger Jacks, that story. So my aunt and uncle, their house was a yellow one right next to Tiger Jacks. And I would be on the bus stop. That's where our bus stop was, and Tiger Jack would feed us in the morning. We'd buy his stale candy. He would feed us. It wasn't stale all the time, I'm joking. But, you know, we had a very interdependent, commerce with each other. When my grandmother wanted to buy a house, they all got together. She had a contract for deed that was financed by my family. So I graduated from St. Paul Central, grew up in the streets of Rondo as much as I could, because I also lived in a community that I could not do anything because everybody knew who Kiki was. And so, I could not get away with anything, and I really didn't want to, because I think everybody had permission to give me whoopings, and I didn't want that. So, but that shared commerce, that shared village, is how I grew up, and why I'm so proud to be doing the work of Rondo Community Land Trust today. Rondo Community Land Trust was formed in 1993, when the Rondo community got together and tried to figure out how do we preserve affordable housing in our community that's being gentrified. and the community land trust model was looked at, and they became the first community land trust in the state of Minnesota. Subsequently, there are 12 community land trusts in the state of Minnesota. We are formally organized by the Minnesota Coalition of Community Land Trusts, which I am now the new president of. Collectively, with all of the community land trust properties around the state of Minnesota, we collectively are also the largest in ownership model in the nation. And so a lot of people really look to what that work is. Rondo Community Land Trust started in Rondo. We grew to all of St. Paul, and now we serve all of Ramsey County. And we also, in response to community needs, who said, hey, we're being further gentrified in the Rondo community with commercial prices. Couldn't sustain businesses. So Rondo answered the call, and we became the first commercial community land trust in the state of Minnesota. So we take our commercial work and our residential work, and we're looking at making sure we tie those two together. I know I have so many things I have to say here. I have lots of things. I told you about that. All right. What is a community land trust? I know that you did a fine job of describing what that is. Thank you. As you know, we're a nonprofit organization that's governed, owned. It's governed by a board of community land trust residents, community members, and public representatives or open seats. Community land trusts are designed to ensure long-lasting community ownership and control and stewardship of assets and land. We are here to create shared equity ownership opportunities that remain permanently affordable for generations of lower income families or business owners. We really do try to balance the interest of community's residents, the broader community, public interest. We really want to promote community wealth building and retention of public resources and solutions to community needs. The community land trust model is an extremely innovative model and tool. If you think about the land, it's really about the land and trust and ownership together. What goes on top of the land, it's wide ranging from a cooperative building that has like double down community ownership, solar farms, gardens, really anything that a community can imagine to address its own needs. We are also about governance and voice of people who are completely, most times, marginalized. That's what I hope that we do with the community land trust model. All right, I'm not going to get into all of that, but anyway, we do housing and we do commercial development, and I think I should let Roberto have some time with it.
First off, please give a round of applause to Mikeya Griffin, but also the Rondo community. Okay, Roberto, you have your slides. Let me just give you a moment to get your slides set up. And Roberto de la Riva, do you want to start? And you got your slides all set. Cool.
That's okay.
Sure.
Nice. Hello, everyone. It's so beautiful to be here today. Thanks for your stories, the interpreters, Wisco for throwing down and thinking about tenant organizing, going deep in tenant organizing, expanding. Let's give it up for Wisco one more time. Visuals, the audio, everybody showing up in this room today. It's amazing. MCs, y'all are beautiful. Thanks for setting the tone. There's a lot to say. It's been a pretty intense 8 years. So my name is Roberto. We started InquilinXs about 8 years ago with the idea that tenants know how to run the city and tenants can build the city. In those 8 years, we've taken on some of the biggest landlords in Minneapolis and in the United States. And we put more than $13.5 million back into tenants' pockets. And we didn't do that by hiring experts or consultants. We did that by sitting in a circle together with people who are directly affected about the problems that we're going to, so that they can actually tell the city what's going on. And when we first started, there was 2 complaint-driven inspectors for over 90,000 units in Minneapolis. And you can imagine who's living in those 90,000 units. And you can imagine who are the inspectors and who is seeing the intricacies of the connections of how the city was run. But we said to ourselves, we deserve to be at the table, and we're going to bring power right to your doorstep. And so we protested mansions, we protested city council chambers, we protested inspectors, we delivered don't raise the rent on Christmas to mansions in Delano, we did visuals, everything you name it, we kind of tried to birth what we could think of what it means to be a cooperative. And so the story that I'm going to tell today is a story about individuals, about 5,000 families, 1,500 units, refugees, immigrants, single mothers, who got together and said enough is enough, and we have bigger dreams. We've always had bigger dreams. And something that's really curious to me is that these connections are worldwide, right? Speaking of the founding of Community Land Trust by a black woman, Shirley Sherrod, amazing story, who took over or retook over or reclaimed land in Georgia. Beautiful stuff happening in Georgia right now. The picture of the homeless movement in New York, who's pushing against New York capitalist enterprises who say that in New York, everybody has space to live in a home. There is enough square footage in all the buildings for every single person in New York to live. The problem is that the corporate corporations are withholding empty units from people. And so if I'm going to leave you with one thing today, it's 3 words. And that is struggle, community, struggle. There is no roadmap. The roadmap is when we put our minds together and we say it can be done. Because I will tell you some lessons after this fight, is that even the city council members and the people who were meeting with us, they didn't believe in us. They didn't say we could do it. They weren't really actually putting wind in our sails. And so I want to just flip the slides here and just show you kind of what we did. This was us taking down the signs after a 4-year struggle. I'm going to go fast just so you can see the pictures. Can we hit the lights maybe? You can see it easier? Oh, wrong light. Don't just flick any switch. And so,
The lights are over here.
I like this. This is interesting. Okay. So this is actually taking down the signs. We used to organize, so we organize against corporate portfolios, right? I think there's a really beautiful model of creating massive tenant unions across the city. We're not there yet. We said we're going to organize against 40, 50 buildings that one landlord holds so that we can bring them together and create tenant unions. We did everything under the sun. We knocked all the neighbors. We knocked all the mansions. We created anti-eviction zones. We built guerrilla gardens when we didn't own the buildings. We flyered the neighborhoods. We were there. This is us protesting the mansions. Maybe some of you have been there, trying to force the landlord to say, sell the buildings back to the tenants. Of course, we didn't win all the buildings, all the 69 buildings. We were able to force the landlord to sell 5 buildings back to us, and right now we're in the process of building the cooperative. In the last 3 years, what we've been doing is establishing committees, figuring out how people are going to run this thing. 5 buildings, 69 units, 250 people, 100 youth. It's all 1-bedroom apartments, and so now we're coming together and we're saying, how do we want to run this? How are we going to make? How are we going to be in the green here? What do we want? What do we want to do to our parking lots? What do we want to do to our windows? What do we want for our children? But these questions are questions that are so simple and so profound because we're dealing with communities who have been pushed so low that they can't even dream of what they want to do in their house. And so we need to open up dreams. And to open up dreams, that takes time. You can't just build a cooperative tomorrow and win it, because if we're going to do it, we need to move at the speed of trust. And that's slow. This is when we were creating anti-eviction campaigns and trying to convince the sheriff to not evict the tenants. This is a deep story of stopping displacement. And I want people to remember this, that the single most important thing you can do in capitalist economy right now is stay put, is not move. And of course, things are going to happen. History happens. But if you can figure out ways to stop displacement, you will put gentrification in its tracks. The cooperative exists right next to the burned down 3rd Precinct. We watched it burn from our buildings. And it's a scary time because it's a massive transit corridor, everything burned down around us, and you know what comes next. Massive redevelopment of people who don't look like us in the neighborhood. I look out my window, and there's a brand new building, okay? And it says, Southsiders have more fun. Who the F is a Southsider? Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know who's living in these buildings, but I think the slowest, most violent forms of intensity on bodies and families, it happens drip by drip, not completely instantly. And so all of a sudden you look around, and I guarantee you, that neighborhood won't look like the cooperative anymore. But since we're saying, hey, it's going to look like us, and we're going to be able to create different kinds of motives for community here. This is during our processional. We protested the Catholic Church. They stopped funding us after we did that. But it was great because he went to this church, and this was a church that he prayed at, and we served him a subpoena while he was praying. Because he actually lied in the court of law and did some stuff. But he was winning 70% profit margins off these communities. 70%. I don't know who makes that kind of percentage. But who lives in his buildings? Immigrants, single mothers, people coming out of shelters. They were connected to the social agencies, right, that would send single mothers to these quicksand portfolios to exist in a violent space of their home. They're sending them to doom. I call these portfolios quicksand portfolios. It's not naturally occurring affordable housing. It's naturally occurring profitable housing. Because people are making money on it, and they're making money off communities of color, right? And that's what's happening. And so we protested the church. It was good. It was a macroeconomical protest. We had many faith leaders. We served, we made flowers, and we gave flowers to the congregation during their luau. And it was interesting because all the Latinos we're rolling with had never heard of this Catholic church, and it was all white folks. And so in the struggle, you're going to be forced with really interesting situations of reality, right? And so people were feeling a crisis of conscience to saying, we're both Catholics, but these Catholics are treating me this way, and I thought we all had the same principles, right? Faith, charity, hope. I guess it doesn't exist in the same way in different communities. Maria Zavala, she passed away, one of the biggest fighters from El Salvador. They tried to evict her when she was on dialysis. She actually passed away during the height of COVID, but I always put her front and center of all of the presentations because we're going to build many altars and statues and memorials because she wanted to see this cooperative more than anyone else. This was the balloon ceremony that we did. This was us protesting in the courts. We got together and started serving pizza for tenants and didn't let landlords have pizza during the court process. It was a really intense time, but we showed up. We showed up. And we said, this cooperative is possible, and they kept telling us it's impossible, and we kept saying it's possible, and it's impossible, and so many things kept happening to us, but we kept saying, we're going to show up, and we want this. But it's so curious to me how many times that you can actually go in front of community, in front of these experts, in front of these consultants, and feel so much doubt from them, right? And I think that when you start showing up like this, you really can't be tested. We filled the whole room here. The landlord asked for security because they were scared because there were so many brown people at the courts. I don't think they've ever seen that. And they opened, I said, when you open these doors, look them in the eye. And so he opened the doors, and I looked like his knees were about to give out. And I was like, well, I mean, you asked for this. Like, This is us in Asamblea after court. We're always strategically thinking and building. So what I want you to know is that here we always reflect. We always think about what we're going to do. So we are building the seeds of what we need to do in our cooperative. How do we govern? How do we create democracy? This is us, during the anti-eviction campaign, try to convince the sheriff, potlucks, retreats with our leaders. We had some art on the buildings that we built. This was a 2-year process with our youth to talk about the values of our community. Guerrilla gardens that have been going for 5 years now since we planted them. 20-minute walk from George Floyd Square, deep in our bones, deep in our community, going to listen, learn, understand what it means. Because sometimes in these buildings, right, people aren't talking to each other, right? And so what we did is we knock on every door and we say, come to a meeting and sit in a circle. We're going to force you to talk to each other, or you're going to be there to be in spirit with each other. And this moved us to start thinking about what to do and how to move through it. That's what some of the buildings look like before. Massive infestations of mold, massive leaks. You've seen it, no heat in the winter. Families went through this, right? And this landlord was getting praised as the good landlord in Minneapolis. In '92, if you read an article about him, he's one of these people that were saying he's cleaning up the neighborhood, getting rid of prostitutes. This is what they were saying, quote, in the Star Tribune. But what was the difference between now and in '92 is that we brought the people's voice to the front doorstep of the entire city, right? And so this is existing all around us, right? And I think the question is if we have the political will. We can't give you a roadmap of what the cooperative looks like, but we can tell you what we're trying and where we want to go. This is building, taking down the signs. I really like this because it's single-family homeowners holding the ladder for tenant cooperators connected to other tenant members who are pulling down the signs. We did a naming process, my partner Camila, to actually think about what our name's going to be when we came out with Sky Without Limits. These are the small things that help us think about community. The youth had a vote, everyone had a vote, that we figured out where we're going to go and what we're going to do. Here's some of the murals that showed up. Definitely encourage you to come by if you want to come see it. You're definitely more than welcome. Hang out in our space. Justice, lucha, dignity, struggle, empathy. And this is us building the community mural on 14th and Lake. So I guess the thing that I'll leave you with is that it's been 3 years since we won. May of 2020, we got to him to sell the buildings back. May 25th, George Floyd, then April, pandemic, right? We had no money, and we decided to flip the script, create a resource center, and we gave more than 1,000 pounds of meat to our members and people in our community. We gave important resources, connected them to many different things. But what I want to say with this is when we're a cooperative, if I just break down the buildings of the cooperative, we have the ability to put $1 million of rent a year into our community, right? Yeah. This is not, there's no way we're not paying rent to our landlord, we're paying rent into ourselves to decide what we're going to do, right? Yeah. And this is where we need to connect with the land trust to even think even more radically so it can stay in community forever. Exactly. And I think, so the thing that we're trying to figure out right now is what can we do with the rent that we pay? How much rent can we pay so that it is fair? And at the same time, what can we do to build up rent to think about building other projects, buying other buildings, knocking down our buildings, remodeling? This is the big stuff, right? Say?
Powerful, right? Right. Yes. When community controls and communities at the center, I reject the idea that everything has to be rental. That you have no control and ownership. I don't care what your economic situation is. Like coming together, like, oh my God, I'm going to take you home, put you in my pocket. I love this. One of the things that we're looking at is acquisition, development, community investment trust, where you take, the levels of different investment, including community, and investment into their own cooperative investment. You know, you can name it many different things, but that's really it. If we can like amass enough in development and acquisition, then you know we've got our own assets to go after the same capitalist people to get their dollars to invest, and we get to as community design what it is that we want.
And so with that, right, some of the lessons that we've seen since May of 2020 when we took over the buildings, there's still a property management there. We haven't sold the buildings back to the tenants, but we don't have enough money to sell it back to the tenants. So if we had funds in community that say, if you're going to be a cooperative, we can give you these funds, and then when you start building a profit, you feed back into it, we can start taking care of each other, right? Another lesson is the people that actually struggle to win the buildings won't always necessarily be the people that are going to live in the cooperative. The values and principles of building a cooperative are much more consistent than the values and principles that it takes to fight an enemy. Right? And this is important because we had to come to things when we started saying, well, there's some ugly faces of racist things showing up. And if you can't look within yourself to say that your brothers and sisters are next to you who fought the fight, then maybe you shouldn't walk with us, move with us anymore. And that's okay, right? And so the lesson is, remember that the struggle is beautiful when we bring people together, and we have to build even more consistency and more trust in a cooperative. It's like polyamory. It takes a little more trust. You know? And then another lesson is be careful with developers. I'm not saying that the developers are, that all of them are bad, but we have come across ones that don't believe in us, that don't believe we can run our buildings, that don't believe that the people's ethic can come from there. And so I think you have to tread slowly with the people in that way. And then struggle again, because it's not easy. It's not easy. So thank you.
Make some noise for Roberto de la Riva from Veterans United for Justice. All right. Everyone in this room, y'all are the experts. So instead of asking as many questions as I was going to do, I'm going to ask one question each so that we can pass the mic a little bit. But I would just ask, with not that much time left, if we could just be gracious of that and we can write down, reflect, we can meet after we're done. But we do want to get a couple of questions out in the crowd. But for Mikeya Griffin, we met this summer. Monica connected us, doing some equitable development work, and I would say housing justice, environmental justice, community care all together. But could you talk about some things that you're doing with the West Side right now and how Rondo Community Land Trust is playing a role in that?
Right now, so Rondo Community Land Trust has its own core programs, and we're working all of St. Paul and Ramsey County, and we'll get back to that. But when we have specific neighborhood partners who are really looking at, how can Rondo Community Land Trust lend its expertise in either development, purchase, and governance. So we're looking at some buildings, hopefully, that we're going to be able to purchase from a landlord like Friends. And he want to play games, but that's okay. He's going to play them back. So the goal would be, can we help purchase those buildings and figure out what the tenants want to do? How do we help bring our expertise, not only our expertise, but how we bring connection and other development dollars, those kinds of things, to figure out what's the best course of action. And it's long work, but work that we're proud to work with Wesco on. So stay tuned as we continue that. And we're also partnering with Wesco and a couple of other community partners, and there'll be more partners at the table, but we are partnering with PERC, which is Partnerships for Equitable and Resilient Communities. Thomas is here, he's a program manager for PERC. And PERC is an initiative to really help us think about how we redirect federal dollars into Black and brown low wealth communities. And so there's a lot of work to be done. Wesco is one of Rondo Community Land Trust partners. This is a large partnership with Melville Charitable Trust, and we are, this was a very competitive grant that we got. Only 4 others across the United States actually received it as well. And so that's a testament to the powerful work that our partners and Rondo are doing. So stay tuned for all the things. But that's intentionally some work that we are working with Wesco. And there are some East Side folks around here too. Whoop, whoop, East Side. And Rondo's also trying to figure out how do we work directly with, not only just do our core work that we do, but also how do we, again, specifically work with community leaders that want something.
Thank you, Mikeya. One question for Roberto, and then we'll open it up. So, Roberto, I got a chance to visit Sky Without Limits and what you're doing with Renters United for Justice. Could you talk about some of the, you first off, you gave tons of hope just in your presentation, and yet it's hard work. What are some of the challenges that folks that are starting in this process or earlier on in their journey, like what would you tell 2019 Roberto or 2020 or even before that you know now that you didn't know then? And then what are some of the internal culture, shared learning things that you do with folks that are organizing on the South Side?
It's a good question. I'm asking myself that question every day. I thought that it was going to be a little bit easier once we got the landlord to sell the buildings back to the tenants in phase 2, right? Because phase 3 is when it really comes into cooperative control and we're running it. We decide the contractors, we shovel, we do everything in the property, right? Or we hire it out for different businesses to do it that are in our values and our morals. So I had thought that it was going to be, we fought an enemy and we beat a champ, and we were kind of like, we're good, we can do this now. And it's not the case. And so I would tell that person, or I would tell that community, I would say, get ready to even be more consistent, more clear, and show up even deeper with your vision. Because I wish from the start, from the jump, that the land bank that's holding our buildings would have said, start running your cooperative and start the interview process of who you want to live there, and create consistent things of what it means to come into ritual in the community and to participate in a cooperative, instead of running it like a normal affordable housing complex. And so I would say, take your time to build your principles with your community and then execute those. Don't just try to build it as it goes on and then convince people who come into your buildings later that you're living in a cooperative and this is the steps that we're going, right? So I think that's one. I think 2 is you have to find a trust within yourself. And what I mean by that is that if your community is coming together, it knows. It knows. So you have to find ways to bring out the knowledge of people that's dynamic and that can connect people for tomorrow. What I mean by that is activities, like the story sharing activity. You create activities like this that are rooted in what we call popular education. Ways to bring our experiences out, to talk about knowledge that we know that we might not say that is true, to then build something else, right? Because Dominic, who's also a really important cooperator from Baltimore, we're probably going to fly him out again in March. Maybe we should do some big throwdown with all of us together. He was saying, you know, people, if you actually take a step back, it's not that, I think in our bones, in our communities, ancestral and communal living is there, right? If you look at collective courage, if you look at Black economic thought, if you look at communities in the world, we're there. Even in Wisco, showing up, even in different places, it's there. But the community that we live in, or the society, makes us think that it's not possible, right? And so what I would say is that we need to remember that, and the people themselves are fighting against that same left brain, right brain type of thing, right? And to actually change that mind, it's not clear cut, right? And so it is okay too, if it's not working out, for people to walk away. There's a lot of grief in that. Fighting with family members, with people who you've done something tremendous with, who say that maybe this isn't right for everyone. And so having clear and consistent ideas that, and loving things of recognizing what people can do in the struggle, and that maybe they won't take it to the next level, right? I think that is really, really important. And then, you know, a longtime mentor of mine said, Roberto, it's first politics over money. You know, everyone wants to talk about the money, and money's important. Cash is king. I would love $30 million, $50 million, $60 million to be able to decide what we're going to do with it. But to build a pyramid, you still need the labor of the people to build it up, of what you're going to love and look at every day. And that won't come from 15 million, because we're not going to use cranes. We're going to use what we know how to use to build our stuff. And I think that is something that is so necessary for us to understand and believe in, but to get the people themselves to do it. Because you're going to call Roberto up when you have a problem or this, and for me, it's, you need to remember that you know what to do, and we've done it a million times, and so build those solutions with what we've always been doing. This isn't magic dust, you know? It kind of feels like that for some way. So I think moving through those necessaries. And then always acknowledging each other, right? You will always surprise yourself if you slow down and acknowledge each other. And I think in our practice, in our organization, in where we've gone and what we're doing, we do that first. We do that first.
Okay, we're on limited time, but we will have a couple of questions. Bear with the mic situation. I'm wondering if it's semi-small room, if we could. Okay. All right. Does anyone want to ask a question of Roberto or Mikeya?
Just a burning question is, we made the land recognition at the beginning, right? Because it's important. So as Indigenous people, where are they when you're purchasing land back?
We acknowledge land isn't owned by any of us, really, and it's should be owned by the community. We do acknowledge that as we're moving through that as part of our work. It's not, we're talking about Black and brown people as well, and so I think just first of all, I want to thank you for that. Thank you. Yeah. We need to do a much better job. I hear you, and I see you, and I thank you. And I will make sure.
Thank you. It's a very necessary understanding, right? How do you uncouple systems? How do you unweave systems that aren't useful for us? Sometimes I feel like we're unweaving a cloth to create and reweave a new cloth to remember where we were going and what we were doing. So Indigenous people are part of our movement. And so they have fought with us, and they are the advisors to moving forward, right? And And I say to one of the sisters in the South, who's Dakota, I said, listen, right now, your house is in a community land trust that's white. That's just the nature